This week on Act Out, the best and baddest of 2019, we clip together segments from the past year of shows to give you a taste of where we've been and where we're headed. From tweets to marching in the streets, this is Act Out. Welcome to Act Out. I'm Eleanor Goldfield, and this is your tipping point. And this has been 2019. Take a look.
We are at a place in this country where even the basic necessity of water has become a weapon of oppression. Even that has become militarized in many ways. We talked to one mother who begged them to give her water because her milk was drying up and they would not give her water. She had to sneak in water so that her milk wouldn't dry up so that she could feed her baby. This is a basic human right. Now, we have heard that water is going to be the next, quote, oil, right? It's going to be the next. I think that we need to get ahead of this right now because it's all connected and it's all rooted in our humanity and seeing one another's humanity and seeing the importance of water as being sacred and how it's linked to the sacredness of our life.
There is a lot of responsibility on the part of multinational companies in this violence and in generating the conflict in Colombia. So you can say that women were the worst affected and the largest number of victims due to the conflict. And so there's that correlation. These areas where you have large-scale mining projects or where you have fights over territorial disputes and you have the different guerrilla groups present and the different right-wing paramilitary groups present, we often see that a lot of the fighting takes place through women. We see that there's increase in attacks against women, and we also see that women are targeted because as the economic, social, and fabric of the society, we are often the ones who resist these groups. One of the important things that we were able to get into the final accord was that sexual violence is considered a crime against humanity.
So with regards to the multinational corporations that you mentioned, the United States has a large role in perpetuating violence that's done by multinational corporations. And of course, our School of the Americas trains paramilitaries, paramilitants. And so talk about the other side of the U.S. role in this, in perpetuating violence in Colombia.
Pregunta más complicada.
No,
complicada me refiero a que no lo podamos responder, sino el riesgo que eso se tiene.
They're too scared to respond, so I can respond.
Okay.
So Colombia has gotten more than $10 billion in assistance. A majority of that has been military aid and anti-narcotics assistance. The military aid has been highly problematic because during the conflict, in just a period of about 7 years of the conflict, not the entire conflict, more than 6,000 civilians were killed extrajudicially by the Colombian armed forces financed by the United States.
What NewsGuard is trying to do, they basically are in restoring, the journalism that they're trying to promote, is they are a news ranking system. And their job is to rank media organizations based on how trustworthy they are, whether it's a green rating for, they're very trustworthy, or a red rating for not very trustworthy. And just to give you an example of what they've already done in ranking specific news sites, they've given RT a red news rating because it's funded by the Russian government, whereas they've given Fox News and Voice of America, which is funded by the State Department as an arm of the Broadcasting Board of Governors to promote literally propaganda and American interests abroad, also a green rating. And so, as you can see, it's not very fair in the way that they're doing the news ranking systems. In addition to this, they've ranked organizations, transparency organizations like WikiLeaks. They've given WikiLeaks a red ranking, which is really interesting because if you look at how they rated WikiLeaks, they wrote out this report saying that the reason they gave WikiLeaks a red rating is because they've never posted a retraction or a correction, which is a sign that, it's an honest organization. But at the same time, they admit in the same report that WikiLeaks has never had to report a retraction.
We took action because the museum and spaces like it exhibit a one-sided perspective of what is happening on the border. Nowhere in the museum would you find the problematic reality of the Border Patrol and its history of oppressive treatment towards indigenous peoples of this land, asylum seekers, and migrants. Our presence in the space was to center the voices that were missing from this memorial and the human rights violations inflicted upon them. Jacqueline Calmaquin, Felipe Gomez Alonso, Claudia Patricia Gomez Gonzalez, and the more than 100 others who have died as consequences of Border Patrol violence. They died in Border Patrol spaces. They deserve to be remembered in Border Patrol spaces. Put simply, outside of any accountability or oversight, we are locking up children, separating them from their families, marking them unaccompanied at a heavily militarized border, then shoving them in cages where they are sexually, physically, and/or mentally abused, with no sense of when they'll be let go. A recent report from the Center for Economic and Policy Research found that between 2017 and 2018, an estimated 40,000 Venezuelans died due to the economic warfare, popularly known as sanctions, imposed on Venezuela by the U.S. These coercive measures have grossly restricted the availability of food and medicine due to the freezing of Venezuelan assets worldwide. Today, we are coming to you from the Venezuelan embassy, which, as we tape this, is in its 20th day of protection following the imperialist move by the U.S. earlier this month to expel diplomats and take over several buildings belonging to the elected Venezuelan government. The Embassy Protection Collective has been holding space here, in part in the name of the Vienna Convention, which states that embassies are inviolable, meaning that they are protected from the trespasses of the government whose countries they're located in. To take over this embassy represents not only a gross violation of international law, it is a clear and loud manifestation of imperialism. It is a tactic of the war machine, the decades-long tactical toolkit that overthrows democratically elected governments and installs puppet dictators to promote capitalism and protect profit at the grave cost of human life and social progress.
They teach colonialism in a very sterilized way. You almost don't even get a sense of the horrors and also the infrastructure of it. So the primary situation, the primary nature of it is not about the distance between those who are exploited and the metropole, which benefits from wherever the exploited place colony is or the exploited area is. It can be right, the metropole can be right next to you or within you, all within the center of it. But the dominant or the most important aspect of that relationship is the power, the ability to dictate the terms of political and economic and social control over a people.
3/4 of U.S. nuclear power plants are leaking radioactive tritium into the groundwater. And tritium is highly cancerous, and it's a routine emission from nuclear power plants, but in this case, it's actually leaking into the groundwater at most of them. Another problem with nuclear power that nuclear engineer Arnie Gunderson raises in Power Struggle is the issue of the Mark I reactors. This is the same make and model reactor that blew up at Fukushima. And it turns out that there are 21 operating nuclear power plants in the United States, virtually a quarter of the fleet, that are this first generation Mark Is. And basically the nuclear industry and the Nuclear Regulatory Commission discovered, at least by the mid-'80s, that there was a fatal flaw in the design that basically the containment structure, which is designed to contain the radiation in the event of a major accident like a meltdown, is too small. That in the event of a major accident like a meltdown, the pressures inside the plant will build so it'll blow up, and they're almost guaranteed to blow up. The Nuclear Regulatory Commission said itself an 85% chance. This is in the mid 80s, and Fukushima proved it. All three of the operating nuclear power plants, when Fukushima disaster happened, blew up.
We live in a country right now, Eleanor, where the rates of maternal mortality and infant mortality are astronomically higher if you are a woman or infant of color, higher than countries that the United States should not be happy to be in the same category with. And so it's devastating to think that we are further, digging into a hole about where we're going to put the health of women and children in our country by putting these restrictions out there.
Yeah, and if you bring up another good point, the maternal mortality rate, according to statistics, most of the women who get abortions are women who already have children. Talk a little bit more, since you are a medical expert, about the realities of abortion, because there's so much false information, and a lot of people on the left understand that it's false, but it's still important, particularly for young women who might be stepping into this and thinking, oh my gosh, it's so dangerous to get an abortion. Because the realities are, statistically speaking, that, giving birth is far more dangerous, but actually, statistically speaking, it's more people die from penicillin than people die from abortion. Can you talk about the medical realities of abortion?
A vast majority, close to 90% of abortion in the first trimester. And first trimester abortions are incredibly safe. In fact, they're safer than a colonoscopy. So all of our parents that get colonoscopies as recommended after that certain age, they don't really think about that in any other way than it's routine and recommended. And that is why it's so important for us to keep abortion access safe and part of medical care, because it really is. And the more we let the other side define it, the more we're going to lose this battle. This is part of healthcare, and that's the final decision. It's part of essential healthcare.
The primaries are essentially a charade, and that the party, as a private corporation, has the right to pick whomever it wants through its processes. And the quote you were referring to was one of the most incredible that emerged from that trial. And it was that if we want, we can smoke cigars and get together in back rooms and pick the candidates that way, like they used to in the good old days. Overall, what you see time and time again through these 7 different attempts and the way that the party responded is the illusion of democracy and the illusion of choice. It's a system that makes it appear as if we have an influence, whereas in reality, when you dig into the rules, when you dig into the processes, it's controlled, and it's just meant to keep us in the party.
The case in front of the 3-panel judge dealt with Obama-era conditions where migrants in Rio Grande Valley facilities were hungry, with some eating only sandwiches of 2 pieces of dry bread and 1 slice of ham. They were thirsty, with up to 20 migrants sharing the same cup to drink from the water cooler. They were embarrassed to use a toilet in front of 50 other people, and they couldn't take a shower or brush their teeth or even wash their hands with soap and dry them with a towel, the judge found. At night, they couldn't sleep. The lights were left on as they shivered beneath aluminum blankets on the concrete floor. But let's avoid using the term concentration camp, because at least we haven't gassed anyone yet, right? Shying away from that phrase does not change or mitigate atrocities. It only saves us from seeing ourselves in the harsh light of reality lit by the horrors of the past. It saves us from the legitimate comparison between the past and our current path. It gives us a pass to do nothing, because, we're not that bad. But as Mike Ishii, a descendant of Japanese immigrants forced into camps during World War II, told Newsweek recently, what is happening now is part of a historical pattern. We're drawing attention to the history of what has happened to children before in indigenous communities and in the Japanese American community, so that people can start to realize that this is not something new.
For example, one of the 12 demands or 12 sections that Trump administration suggested, basically, in one sentence, we can say they are asking Iran to just hand the country, Iranian government, hand the country to Trump administration and say we are leaving. So basically is truly regime change. When I look at Iran, and I was in Iran last summer, and I see how people, and they are suffering in their daily life for what they need, for bread and butter, for bringing for their kids. So, and this is only small part of those sanctions. It's part of the impact that those sanctions has on people. There are a couple of things we should keep in mind that often in a difficult condition, the most vulnerable suffer most. So poor people, women, children, elderly, sick people, so they mostly suffer. When I talk to my friends, for example, the other day I was talking to a friend of mine who is a scholar. She has published many books. And she, like me, like many other Iranians, they are not happy. We are not happy. And she was not happy with the Iranian regime and many of their domestic policies. But she was telling me that we are mostly mad at Americans. So many of my friends in the women's movement, they decided to just keep quiet and sit back because they feel that of the threat to their country. They don't want to just add to the misery of the people. They said, we have foreign threat right now next to our, in an Iranian expression, we say, behind our ear. So the threat is very close to us. So we don't want to just add to it, and we don't want to do something that other oppositions to Iran, like either the Americans or American government or other oppositions, Iranian oppositions who are supported by American governments, like Mujahideen Khalq, MEK group, or a terrorist organization, they use this. They use us and our movement for their own benefit. So many of them are just keep quiet and sitting back and waiting for something to change.
So what they're saying is at that point in this arrest that I was trespassing on critical infrastructure, which is the easement. And so supposedly trespassing. Now, mind you, there was no easement at the time. We were not trespassing because there was no easement. In Louisiana, each count faces up to 5 years in prison. There's a monetary fine as well that can also go along with this. And I'm facing myself up there. I have 2 counts, so like up to 10 years in prison for being lawfully on a piece of property that the landowner said that we were allowed to be there. And doing what we need to do to stop these construction projects because they're so horrific. We all know the catastrophes that come from these pipeline projects and the destruction that happens. And so this is something that we were planning to do. Not that we were planning. This is something that we had. That is just a part of our work, integral to our work, is stopping these pipeline projects in many forms. Direct action is what we're really is something that we embrace.
It's ridiculous on many levels, but what's dangerous about it is everyone thinks this is a really easy solution. Oh, great. All we have to do is plant trees and we'll stop climate change, which of course does nothing to address the fact that we're still putting out all of these carbon emissions. And in addition to that, because that particular study uses the UN Food and Agriculture Organization definition of forests, they're not even talking about forests. The UN FAO definition of forests says that as long as an area of land has about 10% tree cover, it can be called a forest. It doesn't have to be native. It can be, a eucalyptus plantation in Brazil. It can be genetically engineered. They don't care. As long as there's 10% of trees in a given area, they'll call it a forest. So there's no way to assure that this trillion tree proposal would actually be about restoring forests as much as it would be about putting more trees into the ground of any kind. If we could protect the forests that are out there now by ensuring the rights of indigenous peoples who have historically protected those forests, if we could actually restore forests, have a campaign that goes into degraded forests and helps restore the biodiversity in those forests, that would be great. But that's largely not what's being talked about.
gentrification is deep in that it's not just that you get pushed out, right? The other side of it is just that you're excluded from what has come in. And that's incredibly painful because there's a lot of families that can't afford the businesses that come in and just feel out of place.
In San Francisco, we're also a sanctuary city, and we often define that as define it in a limited way, in that San Francisco isn't collaborating with federal immigration officials to implement any sort of immigration policy, but with an environmental justice view, we really see that as, if we're a sanctuary city, how are we ensuring and guaranteeing basic human rights, everything from shelter to education, to civic engagement, to employment, to everyone who makes their home in San Francisco, regardless of their status and how they got here. And so we really see that fight for environmental justice is very linked to a housing rights approach.
A lot of what we find when we go into areas, because we only, we go into underserved areas where we know that people are being forgotten and aren't being helped. And most of what we find when we go into those places is that those communities are already organizing and those neighbors are already taking care of themselves. And so what we can do as outsiders is to come humbly and to make connections with those people just on a human level and ask them where the needs are and how we can assist them. And that's basically what we do. And we see a lot in a disaster. I think that, kind of when the grid goes offline, the alienation and isolation of capitalism kind of starts to erode. And people know that if they want to survive, that they're going to have to do that together. And so it is a perfect, place for us to kind of come in and offer some assistance and offer, maybe some ideas about different ways of doing things that don't have to be bureaucratic and gatekept and hierarchical, that don't have to be judgmental.
And look, I get it. You want Trump to be held accountable for something, for anything. But that's not what's going to happen here. First off, impeachment does not mean removal from office. Sometimes folks misremember that Clinton was actually impeached, but did not leave office. It's like a Hail Mary that they're throwing in the wrong fucking direction when the actual way to score is to run the ball. But then you gotta try to dodge all the actual issues like Medicare for all and affordable education and the climate, never-ending wars. And, that's just really not worth it. It's not worth it because that's what the people really want. That's what we really need. And as someone who's been incredibly poor and still isn't, what one might call financially secure, I gotta say, when you're sleeping in your car, you don't really give a flying fuck about the tit-for-tat paddywhack sandbox fights of the 1%ers. It's a distraction, and not a very good one.
We understand that all prisons are toxic because of that culture of disposability. So it's not just about the buildings themselves or the land that they're on themselves, but it's about all humans are in environments. Wherever we are, that's our habitat, that's our ecosystem. And the prison environment is always toxic because of the way that people are abused and neglected. And so just off top, we have to start with that understanding. Basically, every way that we experience toxicity out here, it's amplified on the inside. I think a lot of times people frame climate chaos and climate change as this impending doom, this impending apocalypse, where it's like, oh, things are going to get really scary really soon. But when it comes to looking at incarcerated populations, I think it's important to note that things have been really bad for a really long time already. Since Hurricane Katrina, we've been aware of folks being left in neck deep in toxic floodwaters with no ability to evacuate for days on end without running water or food. And I think that's apocalyptic already.
And to this day, when I see those coal trucks going past my house down by Harry, even when I see the big trucks taking the last of the big grandfathers, the timber from the forest, big trees, that hurts. That hurts in a way that probably, I hate to say this, but probably only other natives or environmentalists can understand how that hurts, because I think that everyone here is attached somehow or another to the sanctity of the earth. There is something holy about it, and you know it. You feel it. It's in your eyes, it's in your heart, and it's in your voice. And to just say simply that I feel this way because I'm native is not true. I feel this way because I am a human being who was raised by the forest, who was raised by the lightning and the thunder and the rainwater and the wind. People say that maybe sounds odd to say that you were raised that way, or in proper English, reared that way. No, it's not odd at all. Those were my ancestors. Those are my relatives now as we speak. They were my influences when I was a kid. When I'm talking with environmentalists, I'm talking to people, and I say to them, as I say in the welcome to you here tonight, anyone who loves my homeland as much as I do is my brother and sister. Anyone who loves it. You don't love my homeland as much as I do, you are my enemy.
And we have to get back to that and stop suspecting each other all the time of ill intent. Because to be honest, we're really all we have. We have plenty of enemies. And we have a wonderful, beautiful family. And we have to rely on each other. I realize you're tired. I know you're tired because I feel it in my bones. I can feel it coming off of you. You're exhausted. We've been fighting nonstop for 3 years. Take a break when you need to. Get back up, hug your partner, find your friends and check on them regularly. And for God's sake, learn self-defense and how to protect yourself, because nonviolence is a beautiful thing, but not all of us have that opportunity. Some of us have to fight. So be ready for that and know that you're very, very loved.
Thank you to our patrons for making this year possible. If you can give anything, even $1 a month, it'll help us keep acting out. Reminder to sign up for our newsletter at the link below. And to all of our viewers and listeners, thanks for another year of acting out. See you next decade.
And real quick, to keep independent, non-corporatized media like this show going, visit patreon.com/actout.
I can hear the boots are stomping. Come on, boys, let's get some rocks to throw. I can't stand to hear my father cry anymore. Time we left one of you motherfuckers dead in the road. We've been begging up inch by inch, we got nowhere else to go. It's been too many years since your push to serve my shove. I'm not a violent man, but